Have you ever taken a bus late at night? It's a kind of ride where the streets are empty, the air feels heavy, and the silence seems unnatural. Imagine sitting there, the dim overhead lights flickering when a man gets on at midnight. And for the rest of the journey, you realize something is horribly wrong. This is not just another ghost story. This is about one passenger who boarded a bus but never got off. The man sat at the very back of the bus, far from everyone else. He didn't move. He didn't fidget, stared straight ahead, expressionless, as if waiting for something. The other passengers, 3 in total, noticed him: a college student, a middle-aged woman, and an older man. They exchanged nervous glances. Something about him was settling. When the driver glanced in his mirror, he swore he saw the man's reflection smile, even though his face hadn't moved at all. By the next stop, everyone realized something chilling. The bus doors opened, but the man at the back didn't seem to exist in the reflection of the glass. The man sat at the very back of the bus, far from everyone else. He didn't move. He didn't fidget. He just stared straight ahead, expressionless, as if waiting for something. The dim yellow bulbs above cast strange shadows across his pale face, making his eyes look even hollower. The other passengers, 3 in total, noticed him almost immediately: a college student tapping nervously on his phone, a middle-aged woman clutching her grocery bag tightly, and an older man staring out the window as if forcing himself not to look back. Each of them exchanged uneasy glances, silently acknowledging the same thought. Something about him was not right. At first, they tried to dismiss it. People look strange sometimes. Long nights, exhaustion, stress. But there was a stillness to this man that didn't feel human. Not once did he blink. Not once did his chest rise and fall with a breath. He was like a statue, planted firmly in the last row. The driver kept sneaking looks into the rearview mirror. His eyes kept finding the figure as though drawn against his will. And then, in one quick glance, he swore he saw the man's reflection in the glass grinned, a wide, unnatural grin. But when the driver looked back directly, his face hadn't moved at all. The driver's hands tightened on the wheel. He told himself he was imagining things, that the fatigue of the night was playing tricks, but the reflection lingered in his mind. That frozen smile burned into his thoughts like a brand. The bus rattled along its route, stopping at intersections and empty stops. The hiss of the doors opening and closing filled the silence. Yet, no one dared to move toward the back of the bus. They all sat stiffly in their seats, pretending to ignore him, but their eyes flicked back again and again. The middle-aged woman adjusted her seat, pulling her bag closer. She tried to reassure herself that he was just another late-night passenger, maybe drunk, maybe tired. But when her gaze accidentally met his, a chill ran down her spine. His eyes weren't looking at her. They weren't looking at anything. It was staring through her as if she wasn't there at all. The college student, restless and fidgeting, lowered his phone. He turned to whisper something to the older man, maybe a nervous joke, but stopped when he noticed the man's trembling hands gripping the armrest. The old man's knuckles were bone white. His eyes were wide, fixed on the back of the bus, and he muttered something under his breath that sounded like a prayer. The driver opened the doors again at the next stop. The cold night air drifted in, chilling the bus for just a moment. Glanced quickly at the glass on the opposite side, hoping to see the man's shape sitting calmly in the back. But his stomach dropped. In the reflection, there were only 3 passengers. He snapped his head around, heart hammering in his chest. The pale man was still there, sitting in silence, staring straight ahead as though nothing had changed. But in the reflection of the glass, his seat was empty. The bus doors shut with a hiss that echoed too loudly in the stillness. None of the passengers spoke. They all felt it. They all saw it. The air seemed heavier, the hum of the engine louder, the ride darker. The middle-aged woman was the first to whisper, her voice shaky. "Do you see him?" she asked, her eyes darting to the student, then to the old man. Neither responded. They only nodded slightly, their fear etched across their pale faces. The driver swallowed hard, sweat prickling his brow. He wanted to call out, to demand the man leave his bus, but his voice caught in his throat. The figure didn't move, didn't blink, didn't acknowledge a thing. Yet somehow, the atmosphere screamed with his presence. Another stop approached. The driver slowed, the doors opened, but no one got on, and no one got off. The street outside was deserted. The sound of the night was unnervingly silent, as though even the world beyond the bus had stopped breathing. By now, the passengers refused to look directly at the man. They fixed their gazes on their laps, their hands, the floor. Yet each of them felt it, that gnawing pressure of being watched, like invisible eyes boring into their very souls. The driver dared one more glance into the mirror. His blood turned to ice. The figure at the back was no longer alone. In the reflection, faint outline shapes of other faces were now sitting beside him. Their features blurred and shifting, like fog pressed into human form. He blinked, rubbed his eyes, looked back. The pale man sat there, still and cold as ever. But the reflection lingered, showing a truth the bus itself refused to reveal. And then came the realization that made the driver's stomach twist. Whatever that thing was, it didn't belong on his bus. It belonged somewhere else entirely. At first, they tried to ignore it. Maybe it was the dim lights. Maybe they were imagining things. But then the strange man began to whisper. Not out loud, no one's lips moved, but inside their heads. Each passenger heard a different phrase. The college student heard, "You shouldn't have left your dorm tonight." The woman heard, "Your child is waiting for you, but you'll never see them again." The old man heard, "Your time ran out years ago." The bus driver clenched the wheel tighter. He didn't want to admit it, but he heard something too. "You will never finish this route." One by one, the passengers turned pale, gripping their seats. The man at the back still hadn't moved, still staring, still waiting. And then, bus lights flickered out. The flicker lasted only a second, but in that brief darkness, every passenger swore they felt something brush against them. A cold hand, a breath on their neck, the faint rustle of clothing that wasn't theirs. When the lights sputtered back on, nothing looked out of place, yet everyone sat frozen, too afraid to even breathe loudly. The woman clutched her bag so tightly, her knuckles looked bloodless. Her eyes darted around, searching for reassurance, but the others avoided her gaze. She whispered to herself, rocking slightly, as though repeating a prayer she hadn't said in years. The student's phone buzzed in his hand, the screen lighting up. He glanced down, expecting a message, but what appeared wasn't a text at all. The screen showed a photo of the bus interior only in the picture. The seats were filled with dozens of pale faces staring straight at him. His grip faltered, and the phone clattered to the floor. The old man leaned forward, gripping the pole in front of him. His lips trembled as he muttered, "I knew this would happen. I've seen this before. He finds the late ones, always the late ones." His voice cracked, and he refused to explain further, as though speaking more would invite something closer. The driver kept his eyes locked on the road, forcing himself not to look at the mirror. His instincts screamed to stop the bus, to let everyone off, but a sick dread told him it wouldn't matter. The road outside seemed longer now, stretched unnaturally, with no familiar landmarks in sight. The pale man in the back shifted. For the first time since boarding, he moved. It was small, just a tilt of his head, ever so slightly, as if acknowledging the old man's words. That single gesture made the temperature in the bus plummet. The air grew heavy, damp, suffocating, as though they were breathing in water instead of air. The woman gasped suddenly. She pressed her hand against a fogged-up window and drew it back immediately. On the glass, smeared in condensation, was a handprint, but it hadn't come from her touch. It was larger, pressed from the outside, as though someone clung to the moving bus. The student tried to laugh it off, a nervous, broken chuckle. It's just a trick, right? It's our minds playing with us. His voice faltered as he noticed the handprint begin to multiply, one after another, until the entire window looked like a crowd was pressing against it, begging to be let inside. The driver gritted his teeth, his heart racing. He wanted to speed up, but the bus seemed sluggish, as if dragging through mud. The engine growled unnaturally loud, vibrating through the floorboards. And in between the rumbles, he thought he heard something else, a chorus of whispers chanting words he couldn't understand. The old man finally lifted his eyes, his voice hollow. We're not on the same road anymore. This isn't where we're meant to go. His words silenced the buzz, every syllable weighed down by dread. He turned his head slightly, just enough to glance at the pale man, and his face contorted in terror. He's choosing. He always chooses. The student snapped, shouting at the driver to stop, his voice cracking with panic. He stumbled into the aisle, desperate to get off, but the moment he touched the exit door, the bus jerked violently, almost throwing him to the ground. The doors hissed, opening briefly, and he froze. Outside was nothing but blackness, no road, no lights, no sound, just an endless void. He stumbled back, collapsing into his seat, his chest heaving. Tears welled in his eyes, and he shook his head. Hey, this isn't real. This can't be real. But when he looked toward the back of the bus, the man was gone. The woman whimpered, clutching her bag. Where is he? Where did he go? Her voice was sharp, on the verge of hysteria. Everyone's eyes darted around, scanning the empty seats, the shadows between rows. The bus creaked, and the sound of slow, deliberate footsteps began to echo through the aisle. The driver's hands shook on the wheel. He wanted to scream, to abandon the bus and run into the night, but his body refused to move. The sound of those footsteps grew louder, closer, until they stopped directly behind him. He felt a cold breath on his neck, and for the first time, he heard the man's voice aloud. It was low, guttural, and impossibly close. You should not have let me on. The driver's vision blurred, the road ahead warping into endless darkness. In the mirror, he caught a glimpse not just of the man, but of the rows filled with the vanished passengers. Their faces, pale and lifeless, staring blankly ahead, as though they'd always been there. The bus plunged into darkness for only a second, but when the lights came back on, passengers were gone. The woman and the old man had vanished, leaving behind only their coats on the seats. The college student gasped, searching frantically, but the driver shouted at him to sit down. The bus kept moving, the engine roaring louder than before. The man at the back was now sitting closer, just a few rows behind. His face was still pale, but his eyes were pitch black. The driver stomped on the brakes, determined to kick this passenger out. The bus screeched to a halt, doors hissing open. But when he turned, he realized the man was now sitting in the very front row. The driver froze. The college student whispered, Don't look at him in the eyes." But it was too late. The man finally smiled. The smile stretched across his face in a way that wasn't natural, too wide, too sharp, as though his skin might tear. The bus was silent, except for the low, rattling hum of the engine. The college student sat rigid in his seat, his breathing shallow, as though even the sound of air moving through his lungs might draw the thing's full attention. The driver's hands trembled on the steering wheel. His instincts screamed to get out, to flee, to abandon everything, but his body was locked. He could feel the weight of the man's stare pressing against him like a physical force, as if those pitch-black eyes could pull his soul out through his skin. Then, without warning, every window on the bus fogged over at once. Pale handprints appeared, smearing across the glass from the outside. Dozens, maybe hundreds, pressing, clawing, dragging downward as though the bus were sinking underwater. The faint outline of faces could be seen, mouths open in silent screams, their eyes hollow voids. The college student whimpered, clutching his bag to his chest. "It's not real," he whispered to himself over and over, rocking back and forth. But the more he repeated it, the less convincing it sounded. The fog on the windows began to drip, streaks of dark liquid running down the glass like black rain. The driver tried to speak, his voice cracking. "What do you want?" he asked. His words came out barely audible, almost swallowed by the hum of the bus. For the first time, the man in the front row turned his head, slow and deliberate, his smile never fading. The reply came not from his mouth, but from everywhere at once inside their heads, outside the bus, within the engine's roar. The voice said, "You are already mine." The sound was thick, layered with countless other voices, like a chorus of the dead whispering through broken throats. The college student screamed, bolting from his seat. He ran down the aisle toward the back, pounding on the emergency exit, but it wouldn't budge. His fists thudded against the glass, but the outside was nothing but that same endless black void. No ground, no road, no sky, just emptiness stretching forever. The man in the front row stood. His movements were wrong, jerky, like bones bending the wrong way beneath his skin. He began walking down the aisle, each step deliberate, the floor creaking beneath him, though he seemed weightless. The lights above flickered with every footfall. The students stumbled back toward the driver, sobbing now. "Stop the bus. Please, stop the bus." But the driver's hands were no longer his own. His fingers gripped the wheel so tightly the knuckles split, bleeding, yet he couldn't let go. His eyes stared unblinking at the road ahead, which no longer looked like a road at all. It was a tunnel of shadows, walls pressing in, twisting like living flesh. The footsteps stopped. The man stood only a few feet from the student, his towering figure blotting out the dim light. Slowly, his head tilted, the smile stretching wider, impossibly so. His black eyes reflected nothing, not even the trembling boy before him. And then, without touching him, the student collapsed. His body hit the floor with a hollow thud. His face was frozen in an expression of sheer terror, his eyes wide, his mouth open mid-scream, but no sound came out. His chest no longer rose. He was empty, like a shell left behind. The driver sobbed, his tears blurring his vision, but the bus kept moving. The engine screamed, the walls of shadow around them pulsing, alive. In the mirror, every seat was suddenly filled again by the missing passengers, their pale faces turned toward him, their mouths all opened in unison, but no sound emerged. The man sat back down now, not in the front, not in the back, but in the driver's seat beside him, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. His smile hovered inches away, his eyes drilling into the driver's temple. The air smelled of rot, damp earth, and iron. The driver's voice cracked as he begged, "Please, let me go. I don't belong here." His words dissolved into sobs, but the thing beside him only leaned closer, its whisper brushing his ear like a knife against skin. "This bus doesn't stop for the living." The driver screamed and slammed his foot on the brakes. The bus shrieked in protest, tires screeching against nothing, the walls of shadow collapsing in around them. Every light burst at once, plunging the bus into pure blackness. For a moment, he thought it was over. But when the lights flickered back, he was alone. Every seat was empty. No passengers, no pale man, no sound but the low purr of the idling engine. The road outside looked normal again, street lights casting faint halos in the mist. Shaking, he opened the doors and stumbled out onto the quiet street. He was alive, or so it seemed. But when he turned back, his heart stopped. The bus was still moving, rolling away into the night without him, though no one was driving. And in the back window, just before it vanished into the fog, he saw rows of pale faces staring out, smiling, Would you like me to keep carrying this to the final outro reflection you asked for earlier? Or should I keep the expansion focused purely on the climax terror with no closing narration yet? The driver's hands trembled. The college student was shaking, clutching his bag like a shield. The bus was dead silent, except for the low hum of the engine. The man leaned forward, his smile stretching unnaturally wide. His voice finally came out, raspy, inhuman. This bus doesn't stop for the living. The driver slammed the doors shut and pressed the gas pedal, but the road outside had changed. The familiar city lights were gone. Instead, the bus moved through endless black fields. No stars, no moon, just shadows stretching forever. One by one, the windows began to fog up. Hands pressed against the glass from the outside. Pale, desperate faces smearing the windows with claw marks. Silent mouths, all screaming for help. The college student couldn't take it anymore. He ran for the door, pounding the glass. When it finally opened, he jumped into the darkness. But when he landed, he didn't hit pavement. He didn't hit grass. He just disappeared. The driver was the last one left. He glanced into the mirror. The man in the dark coat was sitting right behind him, and when the bus pulled into the final stop, not a single passenger got off. The driver's breath came in ragged bursts, fogging up the windshield as his knuckles whitened on the wheel. He tried to steady himself, but every instinct screamed that he was no longer in control. The road ahead wasn't a road anymore. It pulsed like something alive, stretching into blackness without end. He thought of pulling the emergency brake, thought of abandoning the bus and running into the void. But even as the idea formed in his mind, something heavier than fear pressed down on his chest. It wasn't his choice anymore. The bus seemed to know where it was going, and it would take him whether he agreed or not. From the corner of his eye, he could see the outline of the man's coat. The dark passenger had moved closer without sound, without footsteps. Now he was only a row behind, hands folded neatly in his lap, like a traveler waiting patiently for his stop. The silence was unbearable. The hum of the engine was deeper now, almost like a growl, resonating through the seats, through the windows, through the driver's bones. Every vibration seemed to sync with his heartbeat, pounding harder, faster, as if the bus itself was swallowing him whole. He risked a glance at the mirror again, his hands trembling. What he saw nearly made him lose control. Every row of the bus was filled. Dozens of passengers stared back at him with lifeless eyes, their mouths stretched into silent screams. Their skin was gray, translucent, as though they'd been sitting there for years, waiting, trapped in eternal transit. The driver blinked hard, rubbed his eyes, but the vision didn't fade. The dead were his passengers now, and they weren't looking at him. They were looking past him at the figure sitting directly behind his seat. He felt the weight of a cold breath on the back of his neck. Slowly, against every instinct, he turned his head. The man in the coat leaned forward, so close the driver could see every unnatural detail of his grin, every hollow line etched into his face. His eyes were black, bottomless, and yet they reflected something, shadows moving, writhing, clawing at the inside of his skull. The man whispered in a voice that wasn't a voice at all, more like the echo of 1,000 graves opening at once. "This route has no return." The words sank into the driver's mind, searing into his thoughts until they weren't his thoughts anymore. He tried to cry out, but his throat tightened, his voice strangled. The steering wheel twisted in his hands, not by his own strength, but as though unseen hands guided it. The bus veered sharply, plunging into even deeper darkness. The world outside vanished completely. No road, no trees, no lights, just endless black stretching in all directions. The mirrors began to crack. Long fractures split across the glass, but instead of reflecting him, they showed something else. They showed the driver's own face, pale and lifeless, slumped over the wheel. His eyes were open but empty, and his mouth hung slack like a corpse left too long in the cold. He let out a choked sob, and slammed his eyes shut. But when he opened them again, the road was gone. In its place was a sea of faces pressed against invisible barriers, screaming silently, clawing at the air, as if begging the bus to stop and release them. The man in the coat finally stood. The driver didn't see him rise. He simply felt the presence shift. One moment, the figure was behind him. The next, he was at the front, staring through the windshield at the endless void ahead. He lifted one pale hand and placed it gently on the glass. The bus obeyed, slowing, hissing, coming to a stop in the middle of nowhere. The doors creaked open, though there was no platform, no street, no ground, only blackness and the faint sound of whispering voices drifting in from outside. The passengers in the seats began to stir, rising one by one, moving down the aisle. They shuffled silently past the driver, their expressions frozen in terror, yet they filed out as though called by something beyond. The driver's body shook violently. "Where are they going?" he croaked, though no one answered. One by one, the lifeless shapes disappeared into the dark, vanishing the moment they crossed the threshold of the doors. At last, the aisle was empty. The bus was silent again, except for the faint hiss of the open doors. The driver dared to breathe, dared to hope it was over, until he felt a hand rest lightly on his shoulder. Cold seeped instantly through his skin, straight into his veins, spreading up his arm and into his chest. His lungs froze, his heart staggered. He turned his head slowly, too afraid to see, yet unable to stop himself. The man in the coat was no longer smiling. His face was close, impossibly close, and his black eyes locked onto the driver's. For the first time, the driver realized he wasn't looking into eyes at all. He was staring into an endless pit, a tunnel without light, without end, pulling him in. The man's voice slid into his ear, soft and final. "Your stop has come." The last thing the driver felt was the sensation of falling. Not the bus, not the seat, not the road, just himself, tumbling endlessly into the dark. When the bus pulled into its final stop, the station attendant swore he saw it glide in silently. Headlights dim, engine whispering instead of roaring. But when the doors hissed open, the seats were empty. Not a single passenger stepped off. "Do you want me to now carry this into the haunting outro reflection you originally asked for? Or should I keep stretching this nightmare journey further with more raw terror?" The bus rolled into the next stop, brakes screeching against the wet pavement. The driver opened the doors, praying for a real passenger, someone alive to break the spell. And someone did step in, a young woman carrying a duffel bag. She looked tired, maybe returning from work. She didn't notice the driver's pale face or the eerie emptiness of the bus. She walked down the aisle and took a seat in the middle. The driver wanted to warn her, to scream that she shouldn't be here, but no words left his throat. He just sat, frozen, gripping the wheel. And in the mirror, he saw it. The man in the coat was suddenly sitting right next to her. The woman glanced to her side, confused, and then her lips parted in horror. She dropped her duffel bag and whispered something the driver couldn't hear. Her body stiffened, as though all the air had been sucked from her lungs. In a blink, she slumped against the window, eyes wide, motionless. ChatGPT said. Her body stayed upright, her head tilted toward the glass, but her eyes no longer blinked. The driver's throat tightened as he stared at her reflection in the mirror. Her skin had already gone pale, waxy, like something drained of life in a matter of seconds. The duffel bag lay on the floor beside her feet, untouched, as though it no longer belonged to her. The man in the coat didn't look at her. He just sat there, hands folded neatly in his lap, as if satisfied with what he had taken. The silence on the bus grew unbearable, thick, as though even the hum of the engine had been swallowed. The driver wanted to slam the brakes, to drag her body off and flee, but his hands were locked to the wheel. The road outside stretched darker than before. The streetlights flickered in and out like dying candles. And every time the light cut out, the driver swore he saw figures lining the roadside. They weren't moving. They weren't walking. They were simply standing still, rows of them facing the bus, their faces hidden in the dark. When the lights came back, the road was empty again. He blinked hard, his breath quick and shallow. But deep down, he knew those shapes hadn't been an illusion. They were waiting. The woman's body slid slightly, her head pressing harder against the glass. Slowly, the fogged window around her face began to smear outward, as though invisible hands on the outside were dragging her reflection away. The driver's stomach lurched. Her reflection wasn't hers anymore. It was the man in the coat, grinning through the glass where her face should have been. The duffel bag shifted suddenly, a faint thud against the floor. The driver jerked, thinking maybe she was alive. But when the zipper split open, it wasn't clothes spilling out. Pale gray fingers curled out of the opening, gripping the edge, dragging something unseen back inside. Then the bag slumped flat, empty again. The driver nearly screamed, but his voice caught in his throat. His chest heaved, his lungs burning with panic. The bus lurched forward, harder, faster, as if pulled by something else entirely. The headlights stretched across the black road, but there was no destination in sight, just endless dark. He glanced at the mirror again. The man in the coat wasn't in the seat anymore, wasn't anywhere. The woman's corpse sat motionless in the middle row, but the seat beside her was empty. Sweat ran cold down the driver's neck. He could feel something was standing right behind him. The air thickened, his body heavy. He wanted to turn, but his head refused. In the glass of the windshield, he caught the faint reflection of a face hovering above his shoulder. His hollow eyes, that impossible smile. The whisper came again, vibrating through the marrow of his bones. "You're next." The driver slammed his foot on the brake. The bus shrieked, the tires screaming against asphalt. What should have been asphalt, the world outside, had vanished. The bus was no longer moving down a road. It was drifting through an endless black sea, stars blinking faintly above, as though the night sky had drowned. The woman's body slid from her seat and fell into the aisle. Her head turned at an unnatural angle, her open eyes staring directly at him. A slow smile spread across her lips, one that hadn't been there before. The man's whisper returned, louder this time, filling every corner of the bus. "Kate, no one gets off. Do you want me to push this further into the climax of the story, where the driver faces the final horror tied directly to your title?" The driver tried to stand, tried to move, but his body wasn't his own. It felt like invisible strings pinned him down. The bus hissed as it pulled away from the stop, driving itself now, the wheel twitching as though guided by unseen hands. The reflection in the mirror grew worse. The seats weren't empty anymore. Dozens of shadowy figures filled them, their outlines blurry, their faces melting in and out of focus. Each time the driver blinked, more of them appeared. Some had bloodied clothes. Some had no faces at all. Yet they all stared at him. He could hear the faint hum of their voices, low at first, then louder, a chant, repeated again and again. "Stay with us. Stay with us. Stay with us." It grew so loud that it rattled the windows. The driver slammed his hands over his ears, but the voices were inside his head. When he finally looked back up, the man in the coat was now standing in the aisle, towering over the passengers, raising one arm like a conductor leading the chant. The driver's vision blurred, sweat stinging his eyes as the voices pressed harder against his skull. The chanting didn't sound human anymore. It was layered, distorted, like hundreds of mouths speaking through water, each one clawing for space inside his head. He wanted to scream, but his throat locked tight, choking on air that felt colder with every breath. The man in the coat took a step forward. The aisle lights flickered violently with the movement. and the shadowy passengers clapped their hands in unison, a hollow sound that echoed like thunder inside a cave. The driver clutched the wheel as though it were the only anchor to reality. But even the wheel pulsed in his grip, beating like a living heart. The windows fogged again, but this time the condensation bled downward in thick, black streaks. It wasn't water, authentic. It wasn't steam. The glass was crying. The driver's reflection warped, his features melting and stretching until he didn't recognize himself anymore. In the reflection, his eyes were gone, just empty sockets staring back at him. One of the passengers rose from the seat, its body jerking unnaturally as if dragged by invisible strings. It turned toward the driver, and he saw its face clearly for the first time. It was his. The same clothes, the same expression of terror, but hollow, lifeless. A copy of him walking forward, step by step, hands reaching out. The driver's chest tightened. He tried to push the brakes, tried to steer, but the pedals sunk into the floor like wet sand. Useless. The bus didn't slow. It didn't stop. It only carried him deeper into whatever place he had been taken. The copy of himself kept coming, face stretched into a silent scream. The man in the coat extended his arm toward the doppelganger. The copy froze, then turned its head unnaturally, bones snapping audibly as it stared at the driver. Its mouth opened wider and wider until the skin around it tore. From the gaping hole came the chant, deafening now. Stay with us. Stay with us. Stay with us. The driver clawed at his seatbelt, but it refused to release. His hands shook, nails ripping against the strap until his fingers bled. He looked out the side window for escape, but outside there was no city, no rolling rows of shadowy figures standing endlessly, their faces pressed to the glass as though they had been waiting centuries for someone like him. The lights above exploded one by one, glass raining down. Darkness swallowed the aisle, but in that darkness, dozens of glowing eyes appeared, circling, moving closer. Each passenger now had eyes, too many, blinking in and out of existence, all fixed on him. The man in the coat finally lowered his arm. Silence fell. The chanting stopped. The bus engine died with a cough, and everything went still. The driver dared to believe it was over, dared to believe he had survived. He leaned back in his seat, trembling, his breath shaking in and out. Then, with a long hiss, the bus doors creaked open. Inside was not a street, not a station, not even fog. It was pure nothingness, an abyss stretching into eternity. And from that abyss, pale arms reached upward, grasping the edge of the steps, clawing, eager to climb inside. The shadowy passengers began to stand in rows, moving toward the door, each face dissolving and reforming, their outlines flickering like broken film reels. They marched steadily into the blackness, one by one, vanishing into the arms that pulled them down. The driver shook his head furiously, refusing to move. He wasn't going out there. He couldn't. But when he looked at the mirror again, he wasn't in the driver's seat anymore. The reflection showed him standing in the aisle, already waiting his turn. Cold hand pressed his shoulder, heavy, final. The man in the coat was right beside him, whispering words he could not refuse. Your stop. And before he could scream, the driver felt his legs moving against his will, walking down the aisle, step after step, toward the waiting dark. Do you want me to keep building beyond this, into the final chapter-style climax, where the fate of the bus itself is revealed? Or should I move into the chilling outro reflection that speaks directly to your viewers? The bus plunged into darkness again, every light dying at once. The driver couldn't see the road, couldn't see his hands, couldn't even see the wheel. The only sound was the whisper of the engine and the passengers breathing in perfect unison. Then a flash of dim light cut through the dark. The driver realized the bus was no longer moving along streets. Outside the windows, he saw rows of headstones stretching endlessly, glowing faintly under a dead moon. The bus was rolling through a graveyard, so large it had no horizon. The passengers began to rise from their seats, moving like puppets, their heads twisted unnaturally, their eyes glowing faint white. They turned toward the driver all at once, pointing their fingers at him. The chant shifted, now thundering in his skull. You are the last. You are the last. The driver screamed, pounding the controls, desperate to wake up, desperate to escape. But the bus didn't stop. The man in the coat appeared beside him again, leaning close, spearing. This is where you belong. Spend more. 16 paragraph. No tittle, no bold chat GPT said. The bus rattled, as if every bolt was about to snap loose. The sound of metal grinding against metal filling the air. The driver's scream cracked into silence, his throat raw, but the chanting only grew louder. The air inside the bus felt heavy, suffocating, each breath tasting like dust from forgotten graves. He slammed his foot on the brake again, but the pedal sank into nothing, disappearing beneath his foot as though it had never been there. The wheel twisted on its own, dragging the bus deeper into the graveyard, weaving between rows of crumbling stones, etched with names he couldn't read. Every name glowed faintly, pulsing like veins of light beneath the earth. The passengers' eyes burned brighter, their mouths opening wider until their jaws unhinged, stretching in ways no human body should. From the cavernous voids of their mouths poured a wind that howled like the dead, chilling the bus until frost crawled across the windows. The driver's vision blurred as his heart pounded violently. He tried to stand, but the seatbelt had somehow returned, snapping tight across his chest, digging into his ribs until he could barely draw breath. He clawed at it, but the strap cut deeper, fusing into his skin as though the bus itself had claimed him. The man in the coat stepped into the aisle. His presence bent the space around him, the lights above flickering to life and death with every step. He didn't speak this time. He only extended a gloved hand toward the driver, palm open, patient, expectant. The driver shook his head violently, eyes wide with terror, but when he looked down, his own hand was already lifting, trembling, reaching out without his permission. The panic rose inside him, tears blinding his sight, but his fingers brushed the man's glove before he could pull away. The instant contact was made. The world outside the windows convulsed. The graveyard split open, earth tearing apart as skeletal arms clawed upward, dragging themselves from the dirt. Thousands of them, endless, all staring with the same glowing eyes as the passengers, all chanting in unison, "You are the last. You are the last." The bus jolted to a stop, the sudden silence striking harder than the chanting. The doors creaked open again, but this time, no abyss, no void. Instead, a narrow stone path stretched into the graveyard, lined with open graves, each one yawning as though waiting to be filled. The air outside was thick with the stench of rot and damp soil. The passengers filed out one by one, their bodies moving stiffly, descending into the open graves as though willingly returning to the earth. Dirt pulled itself over them, covering them until the ground looked untouched, like nothing had ever risen there. The driver tried to scream again, but the sound was swallowed whole. He realized with horror that his reflection in the windshield was no longer his, was the man in the coat. The hollow eyes, the cruel smile. The reflection smirked, though the man beside him remained motionless. Suddenly, the seatbelt released, but instead of freeing him, it dissolved into smoke and seeped into his skin. His arms felt weak, his legs heavy. The driver tried to stand, to run, but the bus itself groaned around him, the floor trembling like a living thing. He was part of it now. The man in the coat leaned close, his breath colder than death itself. His whisper slid into the driver's ear. "You've driven long enough. Can you ride?" The driver's body convulsed, his chest tightening, as if something inside him was clawing its way out. His vision faded to black. The last thing he saw was his own reflection, smiling back at him, not screaming, smiling. The bus engine roared to life again, but the wheel was empty. No driver sat at the front. The bus rolled forward through the endless graveyard, headlights sweeping across stones that stretched into infinity. Inside, the man in the coat sat calmly among the passengers, his eyes fixed forward, patient. And at the very back, barely visible in the shifting dark, the driver now sat slumped in a seat like the others, eyes glowing faintly white, his mouth moving in perfect rhythm with the chant. No one got off. The bus slowed, coming to its final stop. The doors opened, and instead of a road, there was only a sea of fog, swirling, thick, alive. One by one, the ghostly passengers stepped off into it, disappearing instantly. The driver sat frozen, sweat dripping down his face, heart hammering like it would burst. He told himself he wouldn't move. He wouldn't get off. If he stayed on the bus, maybe he could survive. But then the man in the coat turned toward him, no longer smiling. His face stretched long and hollow, his mouth a black pit. He lifted one hand and pointed to the door. The driver shook his head violently, refusing. He clutched the wheel like his life depended on it. But the air grew colder, heavier, pressing against his chest until he couldn't breathe. His vision blurred, spots of black creeping across his sight. The man's whisper came again, softer this time, but final. No one rides forever. The driver's body moved on its own. He stood, his legs stiff, and stepped off into the fog. The doors hissed shut behind him, and the bus pulled away silently, vanishing into the mist. When morning came, the bus was found parked at the depot, empty, keys still in the ignition, but the driver was never seen again. The fog swallowed him whole. It wasn't like stepping into air, or Mistite felt alive, clinging to his skin, pressing into his lungs until every breath burned cold. He tried to scream, but his voice vanished, stolen before it could leave his throat. The ground beneath his feet was soft, spongy, like walking on the surface of something that shifted just out of sight. The further he moved, the less he remembered why he was even resisting. The bus, the wheel, the passengers, it all seemed like a dream fading at the edges. All that remained clear was the whisper that guided him deeper. 1,000 voices, all layered together, repeating the same message. Stay, stay, stay. He stumbled forward, hands reaching blindly through the fog, and his fingers brushed against something solid. Cold stone. A wall of endless headstones stretching higher than the sky, each one carved with names he couldn't recognize. His breath hitched when he saw the last stone directly in front of him. It bore his own name. The letters glowed faintly, fresh, as though carved just moments ago. The man in the coat appeared at his side without a sound. His hollow eyes glinted faintly in the pale light. He lifted one long finger and dragged it across the stone, smearing the name until it blurred and twisted. The driver watched in horror as the letters reshaped themselves into something unreadable, symbols not meant for human eyes. He could feel them burn into his memory anyway. Behind him, the sound of footsteps emerged, heavy, synchronized, like an army marching through the fog. He turned and saw them, the passengers from the bus, their pale figures moving toward him in perfect unison. Their mouths hung open, but no voices came out this time. They only stared, each one with the same expression he'd worn when he first sat behind the wheel. His legs refused to move. His chest rose and fell, every breath harder to draw than the last. The fog thickened, curling around his body like ropes, tugging him backward, pulling him closer to the grave marker. His hands clawed at the air, desperate, but every time he tried to fight, the pull grew stronger. The man in the coat leaned close again, his words like knives slicing into the silence. "Okay, no one leaves. Not after they've taken the ride." The driver's body jerked violently, his feet dragging across the damp ground until his back pressed against the stone. His heart thundered, the beat echoing in his ears. Then, with a sudden silence, it stopped. He gasped, clutching his chest, but there was no sound, no rhythm, nothing but emptiness. The passengers closed in, surrounding him. Their faces leaned closer, eyes hollow yet endless, until they filled every corner of his vision. He could feel their cold breath against his skin, smelled the earth and decay clinging to them. His own reflection rippled across each of their faces, twisted versions of himself staring back. The fog grew denser, suffocating him. He felt himself slipping, his body no longer his own. When he looked down, his hands were fading, dissolving into mist. His chest felt hollow, like something had been scooped out. The chant rose again, soft but unstoppable. "You're one of us now." He wanted to scream, to fight, to wake up from this nightmare, but instead, his voice joined theirs. Without his will, without his consent, his lips moved, forming the words in perfect unison with the others. The chant grew louder, shaking the ground beneath them as though the entire world bowed to it. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the voices stopped. Silence dropped like a hammer. The fog lifted slightly, revealing the bus again, parked motionless on a road that didn't exist. Its doors creaked open, inviting, waiting. The man in the coat placed a hand on his shoulder, guiding him toward the bus. His body moved without hesitation now, stepping onto the first stair, then the next, until he was inside once more. The seats were empty, but he knew it wouldn't last. Passengers always came. Midnight always brought someone new. He sat in the driver's seat. His hands rested on the wheel. The engine roared to life on its own, headlights cutting through the eternal dark. His reflection in the glass showed him smiling, though inside he was still screaming. And then the bus rolled forward again, hunting for its next stop. The bus rolled on through the dark, but this time the driver wasn't fighting. His hands gripped the wheel with the same cold stillness as the man who had once stood in the aisle. He could feel the road beneath him, though he knew there was no road anymore, only the endless night, stretching forever. The headlights pierced through the void until, in the distance, a faint glow appeared, a stop. The closer the bus crept, the more the glow shaped itself into something familiar, a lonely streetlight flickering weakly above an empty bench. And on that bench sat a figure. A young man, head bowed, clutching a backpack tight against his chest. The key looked tired, drained, as though the world had already taken too much from him. But he looked up as the bus pulled near, hope sparking in his weary eyes. The doors opened with a hiss. The sound echoed in the silence, louder than it should have been, almost like a sigh. The figure stood, adjusting his bag, glancing around nervously before stepping onto the bus. His shoes squeaked faintly against the metal steps as he climbed inside. The driver didn't say a word. He didn't need to. He only met the man's eyes briefly through the mirror, and for a flicker of a second, the passenger froze, as though he had seen something he couldn't quite explain. But then he shook it off, found a seat in the middle row, and set his bag down beside him. The bus doors closed. The engine hummed. The wheels began to turn. The driver's reflection in the windshield shifted, his smile stretching wider than his face should allow. He didn't fight it anymore. He knew his role now. The bus had found its next passenger, and, as always, no one would ever get off. The bus rolled forward, its headlights casting pale beams that seemed to devour the road rather than light it. The new passenger sat silently, staring out the window with a tired expression, unaware of the way the shadows inside the bus shifted toward him, curling closer, waiting. Every bump in the road made him glance nervously at the mirror, but the driver never looked back. He only stared ahead, his hands locked on the wheel. The silence between them stretched on too long. It's the kind of silence that pressed into your ears and made you feel like something was listening, waiting for you to speak first. The young man cleared his throat, almost asking a question, but stopped himself, as if sensing the wrongness in the air. The bus hummed low, a vibration that grew steadily louder, until it began to sound like a pulse. The passenger frowned, pressing his hand against the seat beneath him. The leather trembled faintly, beating in rhythm like a living thing. He shifted uncomfortably, pulling his backpack closer. The windows fogged, though the air inside was freezing. Slowly, words appeared in the condensation, written backward from the outside. The man squinted to read them. His breath caught when he realized the message spelled out his own name. He blinked hard, rubbed at the glass, but the letters remained, dripping down the window like blood. The driver's reflection in the windshield flickered, his face briefly replaced by something hollow-eyed, grinning too wide. The passenger leaned forward slightly, narrowing his eyes, almost convinced he'd seen it. But the driver didn't move, didn't react. He only kept the bus rolling deeper into the dark. A faint scratching sound filled the air, like fingernails dragging across metal. The passenger turned, searching, but the sound seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then he noticed the duffel bag in the seat across from him, one that hadn't been there when he got on. It shifted, the zipper jerking an inch open, releasing a stale, rotting smell. The passenger stood quickly, backing away from the bag. His shoes squeaked again, the sound too sharp in the suffocating quiet. He looked toward the driver, desperate for acknowledgement, but the man behind the wheel never turned his head. His reflection, however, was still grinning in the glass. Scratching grew louder, closer, now coming from beneath the floor of the bus. The seats vibrated as though something beneath was crawling just under the metal skin, following the passenger's every step. His breath quickened, fogging the glass again, but the words had already begun to change into something he couldn't read. The passenger stumbled down the aisle, debating whether to demand the bus stop or to leap into the void outside. But when he looked out the window, there was no road anymore. No lights, no towns, nothing but a sea of endless black stretching forever. The bus was no longer moving through a world, it was carrying him into something else entirely. And as the thought formed in his mind, the chanting began again, soft at first, almost a whisper, but building steadily as the shadows leaned closer, filling the bus with their hollow voices. The passenger clutched his backpack tighter, heart racing, as the terrible truth sank in. He wasn't on a bus anymore. He was on a ride that never ended.